right. Well, welcome everyone to the latest AI in construction. A lot of you've been in some of the earlier events where we've talked about everything from kind of what AI is to people talking about how they've applied it here and there. And along the way, there's just been a lot of excitement over the last year. But we're at this point now, which people sometimes call the trough of disillusionment, which I think is maybe an overstatement. But there's definitely been interest over the summer and concern that everything's slowing down. And I think what's really happening is people are asking the question about how do I productize this? So as someone who's been through that pain, I wanted to talk about that a little bit. And I brought along Avery Pawlik, who's a senior engineer. He's an advisor at the Link, has helped us out with some things. He works at Indeed and keeps them out of trouble. So Avery's going to keep me out of trouble in this case. But guys, it's August, so it's kind of this one will be a little more laid back. I'm going to go through some slides to sort of set us up, but I know we've got some pretty smart folks on the call, so I'd love to have this be as much of a group therapy session around your own experiences and/or questions, because a lot of us are trying different things and running into some of the limits of what AI can do, but also creating software that surrounds that AI so that it can actually get done what you want to get done within the kind of range of risk that we're comfortable with. So again, welcome everyone. Avery, thanks for joining. I'm going to go through, like I said, kind of an intro. I don't feel comfortable if I haven't done 5 or 6 PowerPoint slides. I'm joking, but that seems to be the case. And kind of what got us here is this idea that AI is getting so good, and you hear about how it's surpassing humans at this, and it's smarter than humans at that. And that all sounds wonderful when you're talking about benchmarks, but most people who have actually used it realize it runs out of gas when you're putting it into a production or just a real world environment. Everything from it doesn't know to catch its own mistakes, just the things that make a human good at doing things. AI often misses, even though it may be better at math or it may be better at writing certain things and so on. So I think, we can get distracted by the press that comes out of some of the model makers. They're doing wonderful things. This is real. The advancement and so on is real, but there's a distance and a difference between what you can do in a demo that looks amazing and it's a real capability, but it runs into trouble when it hits the million edge cases that the real world has. And if there's any way you can describe the construction industry, it is that it has enough edge cases to frustrate really anyone. So that kind of, but meanwhile, OpenAI just updated their ChatGPT, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is Q-Star. This is going to be reasoning. It's going to change the world." It's not. They made it a little bit better. So things keep getting better for sure. We are waiting for kind of more reasoning capability and more predictability from the models. But within a time frame we care about, if they're going to get better, they're going to get more reliable. We're still going to have to figure out how do we make these things useful in real production, which again, we're talking about today. I threw this in here because if you listen to people long enough, you think we're going to have an AI god by Christmas, and we're not. In contrast, you hear other people. This guy, David Shapiro, I really like. He's a YouTuber. He's not afraid to completely reverse his position. So one of his episodes might be telling you that AGI, artificial general intelligence, is going to come, again by Christmas, and the next one might be like, is it all slowing down? AI. This one was kind of more recent. Those of you who've been following AI for a while will have heard of this idea of AI winter. There was one in the 70s. There was another in the 90s. The idea that technology gets explored, everyone thinks it's going to change the world, and our robot overlords are right around the corner. And then it runs into practical reality, i.e. production environments, and you realize the limits of it, and we suddenly kind of lose interest. Again, I think that where we are with generative AI and transformers and all these other models, we're probably not at diminishing returns. It's just we're so used to having incredible speed that a little bit of a slowdown to actually build products feels like it's slow, but I think this is actually a really useful step in that. But it's just interesting that depending on what YouTuber you're listening to or what NVIDIA analyst you're listening to, where either it's all going to change tomorrow or, oh my gosh, it's slowing down, sell your NVIDIA stock. And obviously the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. But as folks that are interested in actually making stuff, this is a really good time to take stock and say, what have we learned? And what have we learned about where these models and AI generally is useful and where is it not? And that's what we're going to chat about today. And again, I'd love to have folks pop in. I'm moderating this. I'll be talking, of course, a fair bit, but I'll be checking the chat. So if anybody wants to pop in, put a question in there and I'll send it over to you. We can kind of go from there. Yeah, so as I've been saying, this is sort of a reality check. We're not actually, as the construction industry and the tech folks that are interested in making tools, we're not really so worried about how great the models are. As cool as that is, and as how smart it makes us look at cocktail parties, we're interested in making tools, not really chasing the hype. So where does that leave us? And that's what, again, today's all about. And I'm going to kind of set us up and then we'll open it up to some more conversation in a minute. But when we say tools, we mean more than just the AI engine, right? Like you can't just plug stuff into ChatGPT and hope it goes well. We need to actually create a user experience that fits what current users do. Those of us in software know that as product market fit. Creating functions that add value, not just generic. This is the problem with the internet in the beginning and with ChatGPT in the beginning, is it looks really cool until you try to use it for actual workflows. You find some value for sure, but often you need to create things on top of it or in front of it or surround it with software so that it does what you need it to do the way you need it to do. And that's what a lot of us are struggling with is, where do you draw the line between what AI can do and what the rest of software has to handle? The rest of this, everyone's used to. You need to spend time on user interfaces that people can understand. A chat interface, while that's very wide open, it's basically a piece of paper. It's not as useful in a real workflow as a table might be, depending on what you're doing, or buttons or so on. The big one for us has been outputs that are predictable and useful. So when a lot of you will know that the link is all about taking specs and turning them into useful things, submittal logs being one of the big ones for us. Well, people don't want to have to wonder if it caught all of them. Even if it's able to handle much lower quality specs on the input, you don't want to wonder whether it's going to always give you the right submittals. And that's my example, and that's where we've really spent a lot of time making sure it is reliable. And that's true across everything. And the final thing, of course, is security and payment and integrations, all these other things that real software has to do. AI doesn't help you with, and it won't in a time frame we care about. For all the fact you can get it to throw up a website for you and do the HTML and some CSS. That's not real software. That's just some interface and some kind of cool website sort of things. Kind of summary here is AI is only as useful as the software that it powers. So guys, I'm going to spend a little longer on this and then we're going to open it up. I know I keep saying that, but I want to make sure we get this. I've said in the past, and a lot of you will be aware of this, you can really think of two types of software, at least for the conversation we're having here. Classic software, you've probably heard the term deterministic, and it's the idea that if I press a button, it does a thing. AI, especially recent AI, but really all the way back, it's always been probabilistic. It's always been saying, when it's recognizing that this is a dog, it's saying, well, it's 98% sure it's a dog. And now in the case of more sophisticated AI, those probabilities become more of a problem because, if you ask it the same question 100 times, you may get 99 answers. And the difference in terms of what these two mean is, classic software is a structured set of instructions. It's a complex interplay of inputs and written instructions. But the key thing here is it does exactly what you want every time. And the thing here is, if it doesn't do that, you have a bug. It isn't, oh, how cute, or oh, that's creative. It's, if it doesn't do it, you have a problem that you're going to then go fix. In contrast, AI, it's a trained set of weights. It's, at heart, it's based on a probability that it got the right answer, and much more data dependent. It's not instructions, it's data, weights, and an algorithm. And the kind of final point here is, the benefits of classic software, as I mentioned, is predictable, but it's limited to the instructions that you gave it. This is why it can't do things like recognize a face or, write an original, email or whatever it might be. So it's predictable. It does what you tell it to do every single time, or again, you're fixing a bug and then it does what you tell it to do. In contrast, AI, is absolutely able to do things you didn't tell it to do. It can surprise you sometimes with unexpected capabilities. Some of you may recall that the chatbots, everyone was surprised that they could write code. That's just one of a lot of emergent capabilities that just surprise people. It can be creative, it can do new things, but the hard part again is it's unpredictable. And it's funny how that mirrors how we sometimes talk about people, right? Like, I don't know that I want a creative accountant, but I also am not sure that I want a writer who always follows the rules completely. So there's the interesting thing here is, in the case of AI, we're finding parallels to human cognitive ability that I think help us, but we don't want to be too nuts with following. So that's kind of the lead up. I spent 5-6 minutes kind of going through that. What I'd like to spend some time on here is like to say, handing it off to Avery a little bit, just talk a little bit about the process of building real software, and how that might differ from how you're incorporating AI. A lot of people on the call have built software, but a lot of you haven't. You probably consumed it or you briefed it. But Avery, do you mind taking a minute and just talking about how, like, when people say stack, maybe we even start there, but talk a little bit about how software gets built.
Yeah, sure. So, the first step is always, you have to have a very deep understanding of your problem, and choose the correct tools to solve it. And yeah, you mentioned stack. That's a very common term you'll hear, like what software stack you're using, basically which set of tools are you using and how are you putting them together to solve the problem that you're after. And yeah, that's one of the foundational things you have to choose. And some stacks are better at some things than others. And you have to make that decision based on understanding the problem really well. So yeah, I mean, the first step is knowing your problem domain and how you want to solve it. And so that's a pretty broad question. If there's maybe more specific.
And if I can help break that down, because I think it leads us where we're going, is a lot of that is understanding the functions that you need, right? Like the first thing you're asking is, what do you need? What do I need the software to do, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yep. And kind of like, given this scenario, what should it do? What should it not do? And figuring that out in pretty mind-numbing detail for every function you want it to have.
How do you think about how accurate a thing needs to be, and how, like, so again, speaking about how software gets built and how software handles things like really inaccurate inputs and so on, like how do you think about that in terms of what you build and what you build around it? You see what I'm asking? Is like, the world is a messy place, and a lot of times software has to handle messy inputs. What do you do about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you're right. Whenever you have things coming in from the outside world, it can never be trusted or expected to look exactly how you want it to. So you have to write a lot of error handling code, things that can gracefully handle problems that you run into, and you will run into them when you have users putting in inputs, or you're taking in data from some third party that might not respect your standards or whatever. So yeah, you always have to consider. I should say that's another thing you have to consider when you're mapping out the functions you want your product to have. I talked about how we want it to behave given a certain set of inputs. You also need to think about how you don't want it to behave and how it should handle when the inputs go wrong. That's another thing you just have to consider in your design process. And
if I may, I'm just thinking specifically to stay concretely with something that we both know and everybody on the call will have dealt with. The reality of construction documents is that they're famously messy. And even when there's supposed to be a standard that someone like CSI or even AIA creates, after a couple of iterations, or someone takes an old project, does save as, and changes things get a little bit messy, and you wind up with that bunch of edge cases I talked about before. And I think what's interesting here is again, running into the limits of real software, or sorry, classic software versus AI, right? Where you've got a lot of inputs that they're just not even sure what you can count on.
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about like the practical process of pulling in construction documents? It just winds up being edge case after edge case after edge case, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's a good concrete example. Yeah, there's a ton of edge cases in document processing, and a lot of them you can't predict either. And that's kind of the thing with a more traditional software approach. I think you mentioned it earlier. It can only do what it's been programmed to do. So, and there's a person writing that code. So someone has to have predicted a certain input or failure mode and have written code to handle that. So if you run into a new sort of bad input or new sort of bad document that you've never seen before, you're kind of out of luck. And the best you can do in a case like that is just have your software say, hey, I don't know how to handle this, but I'm not going to blow up in your face. You know, just display some kind of nice message to the user. So yeah, in a case like that, you really just have to run a lot of tests and kind of be reactive to what's coming in and say, okay, well, this was a new edge case we never seen before. Let me write some code to fix that. Now we shouldn't have that problem again. But there's always going to be something you didn't predict that could come down the line anytime in the future.
Well, here's an interesting way of looking at it. Maybe is when you first build software, it probably covers one standard deviation of what it's going to see in the world. Oh my gosh, he's using probability again. So you could argue that classic software where you're catching and solving for edge cases is starting to capture some percentage, some probability that if a document comes in, it's going to be able to handle it. And every time you deal with a new edge case, you're saying, okay, this is another percentage or another, whatever. So you're getting to a probability where this system, based on its rules, can handle whatever comes in. And that's going to be, you're never going to get 100%, but it's going to get closer and closer to 100% the more you solve issues. Is that one of the ways you might think about it?
That's right. Yeah. And you can help yourself do that with a good set of tests that you run regularly, whether automated or manual. And then you kind of each time you see a new problem that comes up in the real world, that becomes a new test that you then check your software against. And over time, you build up a large set of test cases, you build up a bunch of rules in your software, and you can handle a lot more things. But point is, you have to know about the failure mode to code around it, which a lot of times you don't even know when you're starting out.
So do you think one of the ways we might look at this also is there has to be for instructions to ever get to that percentage, the underlying thing has to have enough structure that you have a hope of ever writing enough rules. I'll give you an example. Prior to deep learning, facial recognition was terrible, and voice recognition, there was a thing called Dragon systems that was, it wasn't useless, but it was really, really hard to use. And what wound up, one of the reasons everyone was so excited about deep learning and machine learning more generally is it wasn't instructions based, and it can do facial recognition really well. So I wonder if and this is, we're thinking of this real time here, but is there a way of looking at what the real world inputs or whatever, the thing you're dealing with, the thing that the software is dealing with, that like below a certain level of complexity or uncertainty, classic coding works, and above that line, you're kind of going to need to have AI at least as part of the solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, to your point, like if you have something that adheres to a rigid standard, then you can pretty much predict every problem that you're going to see because you know exactly what your input's going to look like. That's why standards are all over the place in encoding. HTTP standards, how JSON is structured, all this stuff. We have like very rigid standards for what's valid and what's invalid. So,
but it also sorry to interrupt. It also speaks a little bit to what the gray area, like that's where that's where testing and some of the things you talked about earlier, right? Like can teach you whether AI is appropriate for this or more importantly, classic software can. You know what I mean? So you've got those standards, but in the real world, people don't vary too far from them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, when you have those standards in place and you can trust that they're going to be adhered to, that helps you predict failure modes and problems you might see, and then you can proactively code around them. But in a case where there's not such a standard, like a document written by a human, there's just not going to be a standard in that case. Then some of that starts to break apart, and you have to take a more reactive approach, like I talked about earlier, where you're just kind of handling errors as they come to you and handling edge cases as you find them. Or you could try to introduce something like an AI, like you mentioned.
Yeah, or I think also it might speak to what you're asking the thing to do. Now, the reason I kind of pushed us down this road here is, a lot of folks, all of us on the call, are asking, what is AI going to help us with? And I think, the argument, or it's almost an empirical thing, is, are the documents structured enough that with elbow grease and a lot of the testing you talked about, and just so people are aware, you're talking hundreds of tests, hundreds, he says, with some level of fatigue, because I've done a lot of these. But even so, it's a doable thing where you say, we're going to run enough of these through that classic software for these inputs is good enough. But then, okay, how about reading them? How about creating new things out of them? Where I'm going with this is different types of software are going to be better at different things. And by understanding the limits of what AI can do, but also the limits of what classical approaches can do, you can make a better choice about where you trust the technology versus not. That makes sense?
Yep, that's right.
How do you tend to think about that? Like, you know what I mean? Like when we're talking about unit tests and that sort of thing, like what's the approach that people should expect? I mean, I just kind of gave a hint at it, but what's the approach people should expect to need to do?
And you're saying when one would choose to use just classic machine
Yeah,
instruction coding versus like an AI
right.
agent? Yeah. Um, yeah, I would say it's very problem space dependent and what you're trying to do. And I think most people who are software professionals will heavily bias towards writing code for a lot of good reason. It's deterministic, it's easy to debug. If something went wrong, it's usually fairly easy to track down. And so you kind of want to solve it. If a problem can be solved just by writing a script, writing regular old software, that's probably the thing you want to do. You're going to have a lot better time maintaining it and adjusting it. But there's certain things that you would just be crazy to try to write code about. I think you mentioned like facial recognition, or is this picture of a Coke can or something? Like there's almost no way you could write code to solve that problem. But that's something an AI model could do very easily. So it depends a lot on the problem you're trying to solve, and if it's something that fits well with the AI's capabilities.
Well, it gets back to what we started with, where the first thing you're doing is asking, what are the functions this software we wish it could do to address the user need, right? And I think this is where choosing your tools makes a lot of sense. Where, as I say, inputting and extracting, if possible, you're going to want, if the documents or the source, if it's possible to write code for it, you're going to want to, even if maybe AI is your backup, right? Like for that final 5% that's just so messy because it's a 30-year-old spec that God help us. Again, I'm sticking to specs, but that's the world I know. But in contrast, some of the things you might want to do with a document that are a little bit less, they don't require quite the same level of perfection or accuracy, like summary. Like that's where I think you're finding AI is really doing things that you'd really be hard pressed to do with code. Like if you wanted to summarize a thing, or you wanted to have it compare and contrast two things, or bring other knowledge together with the spec, which is a thing we've looked at a lot as well. I think it seems to me that that's a really good way to think about the tools for what they're good at. Yeah, sorry, someone just sent something through. How are you finding that that AI works that way? Like, so again, comparing a document versus another. When you think about that from a software perspective, not just a performance perspective, what does that look like? You know what I mean? And by that I mean you're talking about comparing two big sets of vectors, right? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, so I would say something that involves natural language, stuff that's written in English is that's going to fit well with AI's capabilities. I would say in general, things that are a little more fuzzy, both in definition and acceptable output, are things where AI is a better fit. The summary example is a good one. The inputs to that, which would be some large document that you want summarized, there's a lot of fuzziness in that. That could be, you could say the same thing in that document in thousands of different ways. And if you were writing like a software program to do that with classic machine instructions, I mean, I don't even know how you would begin to do such a thing, because there's just so many different ways to say things in English. There's so many different ways to structure the document. It would be almost impossible to do that. But that's something that AI is quite good at handling. It's a probabilistic thing. It can take in stuff with a lot of fuzziness, a lot of imprecision. But also what you get out has some fuzziness and imprecision due to it being a probabilistic process. And for things like natural language, that's totally fine, because we can say the same sentence 1,000 different ways. And so if there's a little bit of variance in what we produce in a sentence or whatever, it's not a concern. But if you need to get something like a hard number out of a very specific set of input numbers, that's something you'll probably want classic software to do.
Do you think, one of the things we talk about a lot in AI world is keeping humans in the loop. So I wonder if one of the ways of thinking about this is, what are we expecting the human to do? So in other words, take again, extracting a list of things, submit a log being the obvious one for me. I'm not expecting people to be creative or to really write things necessarily with that list. They're going to go and do other things that are workflow related. So it may as well be a series of numbers. It's not, but it may as well be. So they're not looking to take this and then add value to the content per se. They're going to take it and go write, buy out and do all the rest of it. In contrast, where we've seen AI make a lot of sense is when you're writing something like an email or filling in a form where it's, it isn't just ticking boxes and so on. So I wonder if, again, back to the original question about what do you do in the beginning of software, is you ask people what they need it for. Well, the flip side of that is, what's the human doing? And if the human is already writing, adding value, being creative or whatever it might be, it's a natural fit for AI, because essentially it's doing the first draft for you. Does that make sense?
Yep. That's right. And yeah, the stuff that involves the generation of text like that, that's a great fit.
Yeah. We're seeing, I think, where I'm seeing certainly AI adding value is the sorts of things like summaries, like writing first drafts of things, and some others. Guys, this intentionally was meant to be kind of an open conversation. So I'm going to ask folks in the audience, or folks that are watching, who's done some things with AI, even if it's just playing around. But I think this question about what you've used it for and how that fits in the kind of workflows people are already doing is a good one. I'm gonna, if I don't hear from anyone, I'm gonna voluntold some. Well, Ivo, why don't you hop in, since you put something in the chat? I think you can unmute.
I think I can. Hi, how are you?
Hey.
Hello.
So I come from the AI side of the industry. I am new to construction, but I am the daughter of a builder, and I'm taking on a self-build. I come from world building in special effects in Hollywood. So I've built experiential and things in theme parks, but typically not homes. So I'm looking at AI as an opportunity for concept design. And I'm finding that the sort of models and transformers that are out there are pretty bad at anything buildable. They're pretty, but not good in terms of usefulness in construction use cases. It's pretty, it's just not there. And so I've been digging deeper into like Autodesk Construction Cloud and some of the other workflows, and then trying to figure out, because I come from the AR, VR, XR industry, how some of that might fit together with visualization and concept design. So I think there's probably a good year of work that wants to happen in that industry to take the tools from where they are now to actually being useful in the hands of people. But I'm curious to meet other people who are working on these problems.
Do you find that one of the ways that like Autodesk, even before this big AI, generative AI push, one of the things that they are talking about generative AI, not meaning this technology. This is like, gosh, 10 years ago almost. And the idea that they had, and I'm not sure how much uptake it got, was it expands the palette. So it might not be giving you production ready anything, but it might take you your ideas in a direction that you wouldn't have gone. Is that the sort of thing you're hearing?
Exactly. So I'm prototyping and piloting a new series to follow in hemp lime construction. I'm very interested in natural building materials. And so I am going through and getting Gaussian splats and scanning, and then taking that data to build better small models, because the large models just aren't necessarily tuned for that. And we have to create finely tuned smaller models that then work with our existing toolkits, right? It's building workflows that already work for what we're doing and having that sit within our workflow. So it's a plugin within another toolkit.
Got it.
That's what I'm seeing needs to happen in terms of the visualization happening beyond just Midjourney, because Midjourney is giving me things that I just can't build. It's pretty, and it's great for, you know, getting ideas about a roof line or a materials choice, but it's not really giving me the fidelity, granularity, buildability. Like it's not tuned for that.
Right.
So who is working on the sort of fine tuning problems in this space?
Well, let's let that sit, because people might take a second to get back to you. And I'm going to switch over to Dennis, who is more on the construction side. So Eva, let's let that question sit, because it just might take a sec for someone to answer. Dennis, you guys have been, we've had some wonderful conversations. I think we're talking again soon. You guys have been doing some pretty cool stuff, much more on the construction side. How have you found where you're finding it useful and you know, as reliable as you need it to be to do what you do?
Yeah, it's a great question, Hugh. So yeah, for everybody's knowledge, I'm the IT director with PJ Dick family of companies. We're a general contractor, construction manager. We're dabbling in AI. I can't say that we have any formal program going on right now, but we just have, you know, pockets of interest within the business that we're trying AI out in. Looking to get a little more formal program going. There's an interest from a number of our field people to have a better understanding of what it is, what it does, what it can, you know, what can help them do. We've had an interest from a number of our application developers. So we do have a small dedicated team of application developers. And there's been several people who've been interested in AI really since the hype cycle began with this. They've been finding, you know, a lot of benefit instead of Google searching, Stack Overflow, you know, when they have questions, almost doing like paired programming with different AI tools, whether it's simply ChatGPT using, and so I got the paid version for our team. So they would just, you know, simply go into the prompt and put in whatever question they have instead of saying like, go to Stack Overflow. we've also had inline tools. Cursor was one of the framework that we were using with that had inline capabilities with AI tools. So like you could just be coding and it's following along. So you kind of have like a paired assistant with you, making suggestions, or like just as you're coding, hey, you could ask it a question of like, hey, I'm trying to do this. It immediately starts filling out what you're trying to do, and then you go and you edit it. And we've been finding, it's been 80, 90%, get you there in answering your questions. And then, Hugh, to your point, there's always a human in the loop who then takes it the other 20 to 10% and kind of gets it over the goal line and finishes everything. We haven't gotten too far, but we also have tried to connect our accounting system with both Claude and ChatGPT APIs to see what type of data analysis it could potentially do. Like I said, it's not very far with that at all. Just trying to more understand, like, how do these APIs work? How would you get it connected? What security would you need around it? So on and so forth. And then the other area is, we've had some power users, people were very comfortable with technology that, instead of coming to us to say, hey, look, I deal with this Excel report all the time. I need to do, some reformatting of this report, or here's what I'm trying to do. Can you help me write a macro for it? Well, what we did was, why don't we get you a ChatGPT account and you'd see if you can figure it out yourself. And, so it's kind of like, we're trying both things out here. And, the response that we got back from these power users was like, oh, this is pretty cool. It helped me out. I walked it through my prompts and, it was able to generate the Excel macro for me, or, I was looking for a specific formula. I didn't know who to ask. So I asked ChatGPT because look, we're engineers. We love spreadsheets, right? Like Excel's never going away. So, instead of them coming back to IT with the question, hey, look, if we put this tool in your hand, can it help you? So those are the areas right now where we're finding it. Hugh, one thing I wanted to pass along to you and then everybody else in the meeting here. I was just at the AGC IT conference here last week, and I thought a really good analogy was made. So Jason Tschetter, if I'm saying his last name correctly, I want to give him proper credit here. He's the field technology and innovation director at Mortensen Construction. He really talked about thinking about AI being artificial intern, and using that analogy when you think about these tools, it's an artificial intern. So whatever you're going to do with an intern to kind of go do your grunt work right now, what Mortensen's been finding is, if you think in that analogy, those are the areas that it might be helpful. Hey, go do this research for me, but keeping a human in the loop, I got to go review the information, that type of thing.
Yeah, I love that. We talk about it as thinking about an intern also, like you wouldn't let an intern just go. They bring you a draft and you look at it. Very cool. And I just wanted to say, I remember I actually asked Avery once, hey, can't you get AI to write more? And I think I'll pass it over to you, Avery, but the response I was really interesting because essentially it can't do higher level stuff, right? Like it can help with a little here and there. Avery, what did you find?
Yeah, you mean writing code, I assume, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually personally use Cursor. So interesting to hear you shout that out, Dennis. I quite like it. I think it's really nice.
Yeah, it was a good tool. And then we used, VS Code with the GitHub Copilot, as well as try to compare and contrast and see what the usefulness of each was.
Yeah, I think the the tool set that Cursor offers is really nice, like how it's just integrated right in with your coding. But yeah, Hugh, to your point, I think if you let the AI think for you, you're gonna have a bad time. You kind of want to you still want to be the one who's thinking of the solution to the problem, thinking of the tests you're gonna write, thinking of how are you gonna structure algorithm or whatever it is. And then you can use the AI to kind of help you with the grunt work. You know, maybe you need to like insert a comma at the end of a bunch of lines or something. It can do stuff like that. It can do more complicated things than that, but just as an example, you can kind of let it do the grunt work of actually putting the characters on the screen, but you want to still be the one who's deciding like how you're going to think about the problem, how you're going to break it down into separate units of code and that sort of thing.
Hey,
Yeah,
Hugh,
I love.
if I could
Okay.
just jump in with one thing on that Avery said, and I don't know who said this, like this is like from back, you know, Socrates, Aristotle, whatever. It's really the quality of the question that enlightens, not the answer. And what I've been finding with AI is the better the question that you ask, the more specific, the more detailed prompt you give it. What we've been finding is the better that it does, where it's just kind of more general. And to Avery's point, like it's not going to think for you. You really got to guide that discovery. So it's really the quality of your question and how you build that prompt is really going to determine what you're going to get out of it. And I've seen way too many people use this like a Google search. And it's not that. Like they're trying to, I think in some cases they're trying to make it, you know, Perplexity AI is kind of, you know, a search engine-ish type, you know, there's Search GPT out there now. But I think people really need to focus on their questions, and ultimately that will give them better answers.
Yeah, that's right. And that's another advantage that you have when you have to write the code yourself. You can't really get away with sloppy thinking because you have to break the problem down sufficiently that you can write a piece of code to do what you want it to do. You can't just say, hey, I have this vague problem, AI spit me something out. You know, then you don't really think deeply enough about the problem, and it can make you think pretty sloppily. So yeah, those are some pitfalls you can run into with AI coding assistants, definitely.
One of the things that I also hear about though that I love is that AI can often be good at writing documentation. The fact that it can look at the code you've written and then write notes about what that code is doing so you don't have to do it, or at least you don't have to do the first draft. Again, it's this idea that it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, documentation doesn't have to be perfect to be useful. And that's a really good example, I think, of one of those moments where it's summarizing or it's commenting or it's otherwise adding some kind of higher level value without needing to be perfect. And also one of the things, if I may, that I took away from your comments earlier, Avery, is you think about, and actually same thing with this artificial intern idea. There's sort of levels of complexity. And at the lower level, you can trust it, where there needs to be multiple things interacting, and you're, you know, especially in the case of writing code, where very often you're finding some clever way where this output gets the thing you wanted. It's not a direct instruction to do something. I mean, that's why hackathons were always so funny. Like I find real code when people like you are writing it, often it isn't a click this, do that. It's because this happened, it's going to have this effect. There's often there's as much of a puzzle solving as there is instruction writing. And it's hard for it to get AI to do that in a controlled way. So again, trusting AI to do the thinking for you, it's just not there.
That's right. And another thing I would maybe just to extend that a little bit, a large part of the value of software is almost not even the code that you write. It's the understanding that you gain along the way. Because it just forces you to super clearly understand the problem and organize your thoughts. It's kind of like writing something down versus shooting a voice note. You know, it forces you to distill your thoughts, organize them, and put them into text. That's kind of what writing code does for solving a problem. It makes you really figure out what you're trying to do and really boil it down to an essential set of instructions, which is super valuable. And then that's something that, you know, you can carry on to future problems in the same space. And you lose some of that if you just let AI spit something out for you.
That speaks, I think, to bring it back to construction. One of the concerns people have is that, you know, is AI going to take jobs? And you often will hear people say, no, but if the AI is not going to take your job, the person using AI will take your job. I think that's a little bit pat, to be honest. But the idea that AI is very far from being in a place, very far from being in a place to replace the judgment and just ability to handle the messiness of the world. I mean, a lot of this conversation today is about edge cases and how messy the world is and how AI, it has a role, but it isn't. So does classic software, and often it are up to us to decide where's the line between when you use it and you don't. So I want to call Tom. Tom shot a note in the chat about how he's got a couple of cool examples. Tom, you want to tell us what you guys have been doing?
Yeah, definitely. And Dennis, by the way, you hit it right on the head. You're absolutely right. My business, I help early stage construction technology startups go to market with sales and marketing and messaging and helping get in front of construction technology personas and people. And I use AI, I use ChatGPT every single day, multiple times a day. I actually build custom bots. And in fact, you went to the AGC conference last week. Well, this week there was a advancing technology conference in Chicago. I think Behance and Wade put it on. Jim Barrett, who's this chief innovation officer of Turner Construction. Actually, I was surprised to hear that how much they're using custom GPTs like I do. They're using it for workflows like safety, analyzing job site photos, marketing. They're even using custom GPT to put together proposals and use it for employee onboarding. So he might be an interesting person to connect with, Dennis, as a cohort, as a peer of yours at Turner. But it's interesting. His name's
name again?
Jim Barrett. He's the chief innovation officer and of Turner Construction. He sits in New York.
Okay.
I can introduce you through LinkedIn if you want.
Sure.
I've worked with them I was the sales leader at OpenSpace for a long time. I was the third employee there, and then I've been at various construction technology companies for the last 15 years. Before that, I was a builder myself, working on some pretty large billion-dollar-plus hospitals with Bolt Construction and DPR. But now I really focus on construction technology and, getting back to how Jim uses at Turner, which is, by the way, one of the first companies I've heard of that uses custom GPTs for their actual work across their companies. I've been doing this for the last, I'd say, 12 months with some of my construction technology portfolios. And what I do is I build them their own custom GPTs based off of their knowledge database center. And so what I'll do is I'll ingest their entire knowledge database. I'll ingest all of their LinkedIn posts, all of their marketing, all of their talk track, all of their use cases and case studies into a custom built GPT that I use for sales enablement and coaching. It even writes content development, obviously in their own brand and language, very bespoke to them. There's even a link to Slack and Teams where the salespeople can query questions they have, like technical questions that would normally take an hour or 2 hours with some technical resource. For example, one's a water leak detection company where they're like, hey, does this work on these size pipes? And instead of going back and forth with product, they'll get the response from the GPT immediately. It'll write their emails for them. So how they respond, it'll build a business case for them, because I've actually built a custom GPT that is just for business proposals. I call it Business Advisor. I have an email specific GPT that writes in the tone that I want to write, authoritative, but yet, persuasive and, the style that I like, leaving out words like, I hope this finds you well, and, game changer and words like that, I just don't want the bot to do. But getting back to your point, being very specific in your prompt and in building these GPTs, and then the information that you put into them in order to track certain KPIs, or, even doing security questionnaires, which I'm sure you send out security questionnaires all the time to vendors that you're working with, Dennis, is that, those would take 2-3 weeks to send it to our third-party IT guy or whatever, and they would get back and there was 400 questions. Like, I can finish a security questionnaire in a matter of 5 minutes now, and then just have someone double check it to make sure it's accurate. Because what it's done is it's ingested my 50 security questionnaires that I've previously done. It's searched through all of those questions and it's answered them basically by just putting it in Excel or a PDF even, can read it and respond and fill out that security questionnaire in a matter of seconds, which would take me years. Same with RFPs, with, you know, the same RFP responses. Sounds like that's how Turner's using it, really, with their historical database of RFPs with these custom bots. And then
And
I
Tom,
leverage anything LLM as well to actually source it from all the different LLMs out there, not just ChatGPT, to find out what the best response is.
And Tom, the way you're using this is as a first draft, I assume, because again, you sometimes it'll respond completely the way you want, and sometimes less so, especially when you're giving it a lot. Yeah, is that what you're finding?
Yeah,
Is
I
that
mean, well,
okay.
the reason why I don't just use like GPT 4.0, which is actually really good. The reason why I don't use that and I built these custom bots is because, you know, I've loaded in my entire personality profile, like from multiple different personality tests. I've loaded in all of the things I wanted to say and wanted to avoid. This is my email bot. And so like in GPT 4.0 and definitely 3.5, but I have the paid version, like the response is going to be something that you know, it's going to either be too formal or it's going to be too, you know, not in my voice. But like the email bot that I've created is so good, and the problem with it with 4.0 is that it's memory, and there's something to it. It doesn't have a very good memory of like of things for it to remember, right? It can only go so much, and it has to do with, someone said it to me, I'm not a technical guy, but when you have these custom GPTs, it remembers everything. You've built a large language model for yourself. And so like I don't ever edit usually these emails now from my custom GPT, because it just knows and is ingested and seen so many of my emails now that it remembers everything in my own LLM, but basically my own agent that I've built. So yeah, it's pretty spot on, and it saves me hours and hours of time. But yeah, if you're using GPT 4.0 and you don't give it specific directions from the get-go, like Dennis said, and then you try to add on things, hey, make it more like this. No, I want this to be changed. Hey, do this. It like actually it ends up being worse. And that's when you have to go in and do a lot of editing and, you know, personal touch to it afterwards.
Yeah, we're actually finding Claude AI by Anthropic to be much better now with remembering everything, keeping that
That's what
in
I heard.
memory, being able to tailor as you kind of continually prompt it than any of the other ones.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
That speaks to a really good point also, that we talk about AI often as if it's one thing. And you know, the companies are getting better at doing different things. Cohere is getting very good, for example, at RAG. You know, they're specifically building and tuning for it, which I think is really interesting. I'm going to call on Darren real quick. We're almost out of time. Thank you everyone for some amazing conversation and questions. Darren Young often, you know, will kind of be the contrarian a little bit. Darren, what's your experience been with, it looks like DuckDuckGo? It's stopping him from turning on his voice. So I don't know if you guys are, I'll let him kind of get it together while I talk real quick. DuckDuckGo is kind of famous for being a Google competitor, and they're really they're really guarantee sort of safety and anonymity. So the fact that they've got an AI chat is really interesting. Anonymizing and restricting data from training lets you choose between a couple of different LLMs. Darren, are you able to jump on? Okay, he's probably multitasking. Well, anyway, listen, we're kind of at the end here. I'll open it up to any other comments or questions about what people have been doing. Thank you, Tom, for that last thing about anything LLM. Really, really great. Darren can't get his microphone to work. Okay, you know that he's a tech guy. Well, awesome. Well, folks, I think we'll hang on for 1 or 2 more minutes, but I want to summarize kind of, you know, the point of today was really exploring a few key concepts, and one of them is this idea that whatever we're doing has some level of variability, and there's sort of a line between where classic software can handle all of the edge cases and variability and kind of nuttiness, after which you're going to need AI to get it done. And I think that the key thing here is A, understanding where that line is based on what you need the thing to do. But another key one is what's the person who's using it, what's their role going to be? Because if their role is going to be one where they would have been interacting anyway, it's more likely to be able to handle some of the issues that come with AI. So as you're thinking about building real software and kind of productizing, those are just some ideas about how to think about it and how to make up your mind, and or just create a process that will get you where you need to be. Again, we've kind of gone through that on our end, trying to see how we can really deal with some of the complexity and some of the uncertainty that specs have and other documents have, and have really had to get that balance right. I'm going to jump over to Rami, who can close us out with your, hopefully I'm saying your name right.
Yep, that's about right. Can you hear me well? Is my
Yes.
microphone good? All right,
Yep.
cool.
For
Yeah,
some of us.
Right.
Joking.
Turn it off and on again. That sometimes works. But what I was going to say here is that in all these development environments, as we're considering AI as an enabler, maybe to extending the capability of a tool, is how we actually think about the experience we intend the people doing something to have. And I think that's like interesting in terms of how we actually implement that in the development process. Because with AI, you can essentially change the workflow entirely. And what that person does, you envision the experience for them in a different way. You potentially have a different DNA to your product, especially if it's an existing one and you want to implement AI into it. And you think about the DNA of that product and how it actually functions. And so it's kind of interesting to think how we implement that experience roadmap into whatever we're developing, to know that this is the intended experience we wanted for whoever was using that tool and who is the new person potentially using it too. Because at this point, we're kind of challenging what teamwork actually means and what one's function is within a team. So I think that's an interesting kind of thing, how we prioritize the communication of that experience in the development process. So we're on the same page on what we're actually trying to envision, what that workflow is with that product. So I think that's kind of interesting, what we can do now with AI.
I think you're right, and it's one of those areas that we're just in the beginning of. Lots to figure out, and who knows what the model builders are going to bring to us next.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We'll make this available on YouTube like I normally do, and pop it up on LinkedIn. So Tom, Dennis, Avery, everyone else who contributed, Rami, thank you guys for hopping in, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.